If during our journey we happen to come across a vehicle that has been involved in an accident, lying overturned with smoke billowing on the roadside in the middle of the night, the first thing many of you listening might do is stop your car to assess the situation. Then you'd likely call emergency services to request assistance from the authorities, right? Today, I bring you the story of Jane. Her experience took place on the night before a long holiday while she and her family were traveling back to visit relatives in the countryside. Along the way, she and her husband happened to encounter a bus that had skidded off a curve and fallen off a bridge. Both of them decided to turn their car around and return to the scene to offer help. However, their actions that night led them to an eerie experience that left them utterly terrified. This is the story of the evil bus. Before we dive into our scary story, we would like to ask everyone to like and subscribe to support us in continuing to bring you more terrifying tales in the future. This story takes us back to when Jane moved to Konkan for work in 2007. Originally, she was born and raised in Chiang Rai. After completing her master's degree, she began her career as a lecturer at a university in the northeastern region of Thailand. Later, after getting married, she relocated to Konkan, her husband's hometown, where they eventually had 2 children, 1 girl and 1 boy. Before having children, Jane rarely had the chance to visit her parents in Chiang Rai. However, after the birth of their second child, her parents often expressed their desire to see their grandchildren. When the younger child was about 3 years old, Jane and her husband made it a tradition to visit her parents in Chiang Rai every long holiday. Since her husband had a fear of heights and avoided flying, their trips to and from Chiang Rai and Konkan were always by car. He would drive the family the entire journey of over 700 kilometers, which took approximately 10 to 11 hours. This became a regular routine for the family during extended holidays. In 2014, during the long holiday leading up to New Year's, Jane and her husband planned their trip meticulously, taking leave both before and after the holiday to extend their break. On the day of departure, her husband prepared the car, packed their belongings, and performed a thorough vehicle check. They decided to start their journey in the early evening after work, as Jane's husband had light-sensitive eyes and preferred driving at night. The plan was to leave around 7 p.m. and arrive in Chiang Rai no later than 7 a.m., allowing them to rest upon arrival. Their children would sleep in the car during the journey, which was a typical arrangement for these trips. By 8 p.m., everything was ready, and the family set off towards Chiang Rai. During the first part of the journey, they stopped at a gas station for bathroom breaks and to stock up on snacks, food, and coffee, as her husband wanted to minimize further stops. After driving for a while, they reached the Khan Kain Chayafam road and transitioned to the Phetchabun Chayafam route. By then, it was around 10 p.m. Jane glanced at the back seat and noticed both of her children were fast asleep. The family continued their drive towards Lam Sak district in Phetchabun province. The road at that point was a 2-lane highway flanked by dense, towering forests. The terrain alternated between steep inclines and descents, with sharp, winding curves. Anyone who has traveled this route at night knows it is dark and isolated, with few streetlights to illuminate the way. Jane often complained to her husband about how the atmosphere of this stretch of road unsettled her, particularly at night. As expected, the road was relatively deserted that evening. Most people likely planned to travel the next day. Jane's husband drove steadily through the mountainous path, bordered by dense forest on both sides. He navigated the numerous curves and gradually increased speed, perhaps due to his familiarity with the route or a desire to quickly leave this eerie section behind. Eventually, they exited the forested area and approached a long bridge known as Huai Tong Bridge or Pho Khun Pha Muing Bridge. This bridge, well known among travelers on this route, is a curved structure approximately 180 meters long that spans a deep valley. The road on the bridge is less than 10 meters wide, and its towering support columns rise about 50 meters above the ground, giving the bridge an imposing height when viewed with the naked eye. This iconic bridge serves as a connection between the lower northern region and the northeastern region of Thailand. As their car approached the entrance to the bridge, Jane urged her husband to slow down, worried about the potential dangers. The bridge was notorious for frequent accidents reported in the news. Her husband complied, reducing the speed and cautiously guiding the vehicle onto the bridge. It was winter, and light mist hovered over the road, though it didn't severely hinder visibility. Her husband navigated the curve on the bridge at a speed no higher than 60 kilometers per hour. Just as they were nearing the far end of the bridge, the headlights of their car illuminated an oncoming tour bus on the opposite lane. However, something unusual caught their attention. The bus had no headlights turned on. Jane immediately sensed that something was off. As their car passed the bus, she noticed how eerily silent it was. The engine noise, usually prominent for large vehicles, was almost non-existent. It felt as though the bus was floating past their car rather than driving. Glancing at her husband, she saw that he remained focused on the road ahead, seemingly indifferent to the strangeness of the encounter. When Jane shifted her gaze to the bus again, she noticed that its exterior appeared normal at first glance. However, nearly every window on the bus was cracked or shattered, with some panes reduced to jagged shards clinging to the frames. What struck her most was the sight of what appeared to be passengers seated in almost every seat, despite the state of the windows. Terrified and confused by what she had seen, Jane quickly turned her eyes back to the road. She refrained from asking her husband if he had seen the same thing, not wanting to invite any unsettling discussion at that hour. Moments later, after their car had passed the bus, a screeching sound of tires and a loud, chaotic crash echoed from behind them. Her husband immediately slowed the car and pulled over to the left side of the road, turning on the hazard lights. He speculated that the bus must have been in an accident and insisted they turn back to help. Despite Jane's unease and her desire to dissuade him, her husband, being a skeptic of the supernatural, had already started turning the car around to head back toward the bridge. As they drove back to the area where they thought the accident might have occurred, Jane's anxiety deepened. Yet, when they reached the bridge, they found no tire marks, no debris, and no signs of a crash. Her husband decided to park the car in the middle of the bridge, turned on the hazard lights, and got out. Jane, alarmed, tried to persuade him not to leave the car, but he ignored her and walked around to her side, opening the door and asking her to join him in looking for the source of the commotion. Reluctantly, Jane stepped out of the car. Together, they peered over the side of the bridge, scanning the deep, dark ravine below. The abyss was so enveloped in darkness that they couldn't even make out the base of the bridge's support columns. All they could see below was dense forest. Suddenly, they heard faint voices, agonized cries, as if from multiple people, rising from the depths of the ravine. The sound grew louder, echoing with sorrow and pain. Yet, when they looked around, there were no visible signs of an accident. As the cries intensified, they seemed to come from all directions beneath the bridge. Jane and her husband exchanged a glance, their silent communication conveying mutual understanding and fear. It was clear to both of them that lingering any longer might invite something far worse than disembodied voices. Without a word, they rushed back into the car, slammed the doors shut, and sped away from the bridge as quickly as possible. Not long after, Jane and her family safely arrived in Chiang Rai. The strange events they had experienced kept both her and her husband wide awake throughout the journey. Once they reached their destination, Jane recounted the condition of the tour bus they had passed that night, describing its eerie appearance to her husband. She also shared the strange occurrences they had witnessed with her parents. At that moment, a realization struck her. A year before that night, there had been a major news story about a tour bus that lost control and careened off the very same bridge, resulting in the tragic deaths of 37 people. During her visit to Chiang Rai, Jane did not forget to take her family to make merit and dedicate blessings to the victims of that tragic accident. Moreover, after the chilling experience on the bridge, Jane and her husband decided to adjust their travel plans whenever they had to journey back to Chiang Rai. They resolved to always pass that spot before sunset and avoid crossing the bridge at night altogether. For those of you who are curious about what the bridge looks like, you can easily search for it on Google. The Huai Tong Bridge is actually a very beautiful structure with a scenic viewpoint where tourists often stop to take stunning photos. However, imagining the atmosphere there at night, I personally wouldn't dare to drive across it in the dark unless absolutely necessary. Before we part ways today, don't forget to like and follow to support us in sharing more spine-chilling stories. And if you're someone who enjoys consuming haunting tales and eerie experiences, let us be part of bringing those thrills to you.